Welcome back to the Talkie Taka podcast, listeners. And if anybody is watching this on YouTube, your eagle eyes would have noticed that we have an old familiar face back on the pod this week. Suddenly, after a couple of weeks of some goals and some good results, the Chelsea boys just stick their head out of the sand like the ostriches. And Ab joins us on the pod. So we welcome Ab back. And we also have Ashwin on the pod again. We talked about the 7 goals that United scored last week and how things were looking so rosy. Ashwin, how was your week this week?
It wasn't. I think both RK and I said that it's probably a false dawn because it was a win against Southampton, who played with 10 men, and it was a win against a lowly. Is it are they Championship League One? But whatever Barnsley are. Um, so we shouldn't be reading too much into it, and we did play well against Palace, but we only got a point, so it wasn't the best week. Speaking of teams that got a point, I would I would say Arsenal made a point by going toe to toe with City, um, and they just showed that they are champions material, even though they might not win it. But the City juggernaut, they keep coming back. They got a goal at the very end, and they stopped Arsenal from going top. Um, but yeah, what it showed us is that these are two really incredible teams who are both capable of winning the title. So my talking moment is that Arsenal City 2-all draw that we saw at the Etihad.
And that's the big game of the week. We're going to spend most of our time on this episode talking about just that game. Just before that, though, I'm going to quickly cover some of the other results that we had this week. We saw Aston Villa win again, 3-1 against Wolves. Fulham 3-1 against Newcastle. That was a bit of a surprise. We saw Tottenham 3-1. So clearly 3-1 was the result of the weekend. So Tottenham winning 3-1 at Brentford. Liverpool with a little bit of a tricky assignment against Bournemouth. Bournemouth, who did play really well, and Liverpool got the job done. 3-0 with 2 goals from Luis Diaz and an absolute stunner from Darwin Nunez. And that's my talking moment of the week. Darwin Nunez is, as any listener on the pod last year would have realized, Darwin, I do have a soft spot for Darwin. Everything doesn't go his way, and I'm sure everybody who watches the Premier League knows that things don't go his way. He hits the post a lot. He misses chances. But there's just something about him. He tries really hard, and he seems to be a really likable guy. So I absolutely loved that moment for him. Stunning goal, absolutely stunning goal. 2 great goals by Luis Diaz as well. So Liverpool got the job done in a tricky game. We saw Brighton 2-2 against Nottingham Forest with a red card. There was, of course, another big game with a red card this weekend. We'll come to that. Leicester drawing against Everton. What else did we have? We had Southampton drawing against Ipswich. Ashwin already touched upon Crystal Palace against United. And of course, Chelsea smashing West Ham 3-0. And with that, let's come to you, Ab. How has your week been and what are your talking moments?
Really good week from a Chelsea point of view. Hockey moment has to be, and so at least everyone seems to be talking about is Nicholas Jackson. Whether he is suddenly become very good. Uh, I mean, so my talking moment is Nico Jackson and specifically the second goal he scored because that was a goal. If that sort of a finish, if a more recognized striker had scored, we would have appreciated it a little bit more, I feel. But yeah, he's on 4 goals this season. He's doing well. The team is creating a lot of chances, which is also good. Where we will eventually end up, I know we're going to talk about, but it's smooth sailing so far for Jackson specifically.
Nico Jackson was another one who missed a lot of chances last season, but smooth sailing for Nico Jackson is what you're saying up. So then just why don't you get us started with this episode? How good are Chelsea really? So it's been a couple of weeks of really good results. The goals are flying in. Nobody's talking about the second set of 20 people who probably Enzo isn't training every week or whatever that number was. So what's happening at Chelsea? How good is this team really? Is it a function of the coaching working out? Is it a function of bad opposition? Is there a bomb waiting to be blown up somewhere in there? What do you expect for the season?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer. Where Chelsea are, I think it's far too early to tell what this team is actually capable of over a 38 game Premier League season. But let's talk about a couple of the things that you mentioned. The coaching, I think there's a lot of the coaching that is coming through. I think defensively, I'd say the defensive side of the middle third plus the defensive third is a lot more organized than it was under Pochettino. We have to give some credit to Pochettino because ultimately these are the players that he trained last year, and before they trained under him, they had not played together. So Maresca is sort of reaping a little bit of the rewards or the seeds that have been sown before he came here. It's tough to tell where the team will land. There are some very positive statistics in terms of course, XGA is fairly good. The number of interceptions, all of those defensive related statistics, which I don't really always look at, but I looked at it because it's a good sign of the trend of where we're going in the absence of other things. So those aspects are good. I think it's tough to tell where we will end up. Obviously, I would love top four. I would take it. I honestly don't know where we'll end up. Just the last point on the large squad size. So you might have mentioned that Maresca might not be training some of the others. We had a midweek game as well. So we had a midweek game against Barrow in the League Cup, which is like I think they're in League Two, right? Probably lower than the Barnsley team that United faced, and we won 5-0. But the thing to note there was all 11 players were new, which means Chelsea Maresca used that squad size, which also included Ben Chilwell, who he had very explicitly said, "I want to sell this guy." Right, and he was asked about it also in the press conference, and he said, "I made a mistake" or whatever. But anyway, so I think it's in these cup games that the squad size can come out such that your Premier League 11 or the 13 or whatever, to the maximum extent possible, plays only a game a week. Same applies for the Conference League as well, I would assume. So I think that squad size will come into play, which could push Chelsea a little higher up the table than they would have otherwise played. But yeah, I think anywhere between sixth and third is a realistic possibility. More, if you ask me to put probabilities to it, I would say fifth or sixth is where Chelsea will probably end up. I think based on the balance of things. Also, I know Liverpool also played West Ham this week, but West Ham are awful. West Ham are awful.
Yeah.
So that's not really the best test of where a team is.
And also, you mentioned about the top four, right? So the difference between uh, fifth place Chelsea and 11th place United is just 3 points at the moment, right? So that just goes to show how inconsistent those teams from fifth to 11th are. We keep talking about United and Chelsea. Even last season, Chelsea came out of nowhere in the end and they just pipped United for whatever position they were both going for. So it's just very difficult to pinpoint exactly which team is doing well, which team is in form. You can just have like two bad games and just drop to mid-table. You could have two good games and go into like the top five or top four. But yeah, I agree. West Ham are shite.
Yeah, but that was the second game Liverpool played this week. It ended. Liverpool ended up scoring five. I think West Ham had their moments in the game, but yeah, they were shite. That's been a. I think Lopetegui. I wasn't really convinced by him, even in his even at Wolves. But let's see how that goes. But up while we have you, just another question. What do you think is the future at Chelsea? Do you think they're going to continue behaving that the way they are in the transfer market for the next two transfer markets? Do they have the money to do that? Do they have enough assets to sell from the academy? How do they sustain the model, and how do they? Do you think that they can actually sell all the excess baggage that they have currently?
Yeah, I think one of the things that they're hoping will happen is that as the second string of players plays the cup games, and a lot of those players are players that we bought for not much money, those will be able to flip. Uh, for example, in midweek, the entire 90 minutes was played by Cesare Cassade, who's that Italian young midfielder. He was on loan at Leicester or something last season for half a season, I think. He played very well. Now, he came in for not much. So you could potentially, if you can flip him for 25, 30, that's how you keep the other stuff going. So what I expect to happen is I don't think this will continue. Right? I think a lot of the crazy spending over the summer and the ins and the outs were precipitated a little bit by the previous ins and outs that we had done, and the fact that the manager changed over the summer. So Maresca came in and he's like, I don't want Sterling, I don't want Chilwell, I don't want, and those were the players on a higher salary, and those were the players who were also, of course, older, and of course the two are related. So I don't expect this will continue for very long. It's not sustainable to do it this way. The positive in from a squad point of view is that we might have had a lot of players coming in and out, but pretty much the last two Premier League games, 10 out of the 11 that have started, I think, were here last year. Sancho being the only exception, right? So I think this cannot continue, but the squad does need to trim down, and the club is hoping that the cup performances of some of these players who we might have bought for 10 or 15 million will allow them to sell them at a profit for maybe 25, 30, 40, whatever, depending on how they eventually do. Right? So there's a lot of stuff coming out. So, for example, Madueke was bought for 30 million, but now the club says, okay, if we were to sell him now, we would get 45 or something like that. It's all fictional numbers in the air, but that's what they're hoping. I don't expect this to sustain.
You mentioned Cassidy, and Cassidy 12 months ago was one of the really hot prospects coming out of Chelsea. The names Malo Gusto, Cassidy, just maybe just a rung below Levi Colville, who was probably ready for first team football last season. They are the, like I'm assuming, the base for this model that Chelsea are running right now. A lot of these academy graduates or low transfer fee graduates who kind of get sold for a lot of money, like you mentioned. But we also saw like a really hot talent in Gumoha. I think that's in whatever, however you pronounce his name, Rio Ngumoha, Gumoha, whatever his name is. But he left Chelsea, and apparently Chelsea had really high hopes for him in the academy as well. And there is a narrative building that youngsters, like in a change from the last 10 years, where everybody thought that Chelsea is the right club to go to as a youngster, that people are now re-evaluating whether that's the truth with the number of people that they have, and therefore the line, the ability to reach the first team at Chelsea is becoming a lot harder. Do you think that's going to impact this model and everything that Chelsea are doing as well?
Short answer, yes. But the narrative that, because Chelsea go out and buy players, there's no space for academy players. That's been there since the Roman Abramovich days, right? So that's been there for 20 years. And there were players trying to break through at that time as well. Dominic Solanke was one of them, for example, right? And they could not for whatever reason. So that is not a new narrative that is necessarily a result of this ownership and the way they are running the club. But I agree that it is from it, like, for example, if I was a 17-year-old today breaking into the limelight and trying to figure out where I want to go, is Chelsea the most attractive destination? Probably not. Not as it was maybe 10 years ago. Reputation has been hampered by the activities at the club. There's no doubt about that. But if you just look at the last 5 years, there have been more number of academy graduates who played for Chelsea than the 15 years before that. So that's a positive, and that's the way I look at it. But definitely, there's no doubt that a 17-year-old who's thinking about where to go would think twice before going to Chelsea. Who might just say, "Okay, you sit on the bench, and then next year I'll try and flip you for double the amount at which I bought you without hardly playing any minutes." It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue may only see the issue 5 years from now, because they still have a lot of young talent that can be flipped even now, that's in the squad. But talking about some local talents, I saw some frustration on the group about Marcus Rashford, Ashwin, and a few others like Bruno Fernandes as well, two United stalwarts. And let's come to you, Ashwin, on the United game or United games. Seven goals in 1 week, and then followed by one goal in two games the next week, with two draws. So, how's this Jekyll and Hyde season going, and like, what do you make of this week?
Yeah, so like I said before, the 7 goals is kind of an anomaly in some sense because Ten Hag teams don't score that much, right? They in his first season actually we scored quite decently in the cup games. We had a period where we were winning 3-0 all the time, but like last season, for example, like it was we didn't score much. This season as well, I think that pattern is kind of repeated. Um, that being said, I still feel that we are creating a lot of chances. The FC 20 game aside, where I don't think we created much, the Crystal Palace game, if you talk about that, the first half we dominated that particular game, and which is in sharp contrast to the Crystal Palace game that happened the year before, where we lost 4-0 and Casemiro was playing centre back, if you remember. So it was a much stronger team. There was really good link up play. There are people who are still missing a lot of chances, and that's why we are not getting the 3 points. It's not like we have been playing badly. Of course, the second half was a very different game with Crystal Palace getting some of the chances, and we had Andrea Nana to kind of thank us for those points. Martinez with a crazy moment as well, where he tried to almost like scissor kick or like take off the legs of the player that he was trying to tackle. But I think the underlying thing is that we are not playing badly. There are some stats that I had actually downloaded earlier. So compared to last season, where we were second worst and comes to shot conceded, we now have a rank 6 when it comes to shot conceded outside the box. We were third worst last season. We are ninth right now. Expected goals conceded 16th last season, 10th right now. Interceptions 11th last season, first right now. So things have definitely changed. One of the allegations, if I can call it that, for a lack of a better word, with Ten Hag is that we've always felt that he is not very good when it comes to communication, and I think something has changed this year. So it's just about that moment when it starts clicking together. We need someone, whether that's a Zirkzee, whether that's Rashford, whether that's Bruno Fernandes, scoring. And I know it seems very simple to say that you need to just score, but that's exactly what is missing. We are creating chances and we need someone to score.
Do you think they are ready for the top four this season? Where do you think they are in that journey? So I know we have been talking about those stats about the XG and the chances created and the chances conceded and all of that. We were discussing this before we started the pod on our groups. So there is clearly some early signs of progress, although it is, we must mention, it's early. Where do you think they are this season? So, do you think there's a top four here to be grabbed? Is Chelsea a threat? Is Spurs going to be a threat? Where do you think United are finally?
Yeah, I don't really think, like, if you look at the top four right now, it's City, Liverpool, Villa, and Arsenal. I don't see any of them kind of dropping for United to get into that top four. And like you mentioned, there are the likes of Spurs and Chelsea and like Newcastle even, who are challenging for that fourth, fifth spot. So I still feel we are a top six team. We are not a top four team yet. Um, Ten Hag keeps talking about trophies. I think he's the man who's still kind of targeting those cups as opposed to like, a top four finish for him. Getting a cup is like great job, well done. Try to finish as high as possible. He's not aiming for the league, and realistically, so he should not be, right? So I don't think we are anywhere close to the top four mark. We have signed some really good players, some really promising players like Xerxes, who's been doing really well. Dillett, I think he had a shaky start, but he's still kind of established a spot for himself. Lenny Yoro to come as well. And then Mazurai as well, who's been playing really well. So we have made the right signings. We need to progress our play, our game with those players. And we need our senior players like Rashford and Bruno to kind of help us to progress. That last bit, about Rashford and Bruno, even though I love them to bits, is not happening at this point in time. And I don't know if that will happen. I think I saw the last game, the FC20 game, where Bruno was just a very frustrated figure. He had his chances. It was a tough chance. He could have almost scored. And had that gone in, we would have been just praising Bruno for his finishing abilities. But he's a senior player who is not performing to the levels expected out of. And that is
Yeah.
what will lead us to not finishing in top four.
Okay. I never imagined that Ashwin or any United fan might say that Bruno might lead to them not finishing top four, or the chances that he's missing actually.
Like he's one of those, right? Like there are multiple players. So you have Rashford, you have Bruno, you have like senior players like Casemiro. We were talking about him last season, for example.
I have a question for you, Ashwin. So you mentioned a lot of the signings that they have made, right? And this week, I don't know if it's a result of the stuff that I'm watching on YouTube, but a lot of nonsensical fan reactions, right? Extremely knee-jerk reactions fans and they put out on social media and YouTube and stuff like that has been coming out, and a lot of it is very critical of Bruno, of course, because it's just how it is in social media. But there was a fair few critical opinions of Ugarte also. So I wanted to know from you what you think of that signing, and you know.
Well, Eric Ten Hag said in his first press conference that Ugarte needs his time, right? He said he would need at least a month to settle in. So let's give him that much time. I think his first few games have been meh. Like, there's nothing good, there's nothing bad as such. The like we still haven't figured out that balance in the midfield. Like suddenly out of nowhere, Ericsson has come in and like in the Palace game, he started and he was actually great. Like he wasn't he we seemed like a much more attacking outfit because of him. He scored in the FC20 game as well. But Ugarte has been signed just to be that destroyer. He is not going to be the one who is going to be that all-round player that probably what we were hoping Pogba or someone to be. So I think the expectations from Ugarte are wrong. Like he's not going to be the guy who's like Saul or creativity issues. He's just going to be the guy who's going to help break the attack from the opposition. And he needs his time. So that's where I am on the Ugarte bit.
So, just one quick question before we go to the big game. Berada has come out and said that he expects United to not challenge, win the Premier League by 2028.
That's
First of
that's
all, what do you
that's
make
an
of
aim.
that statement? And second of all, how do you believe it?
Well, that's an aim, right? You can always aim for the North Star. So he hasn't made a statement per se. It was like something that he has said in a team staff meeting. It was obviously, well, I think Laurie Whitwell wrote that article, and when it was mentioned in the staff meeting, there were people sneering, of course, because like there's no like it's good to have a target, but right now with the team languishing in 11th, drawing to FC20 and Crystal Palace and whatnot, it does not seem to be the case. So listen, I think whatever we have seen from Ineos till now has been positive, and they would need at least two or three transfer windows. They would need to really see out this period before we can really establish whether United can challenge for the Premier League or not.
All right, we'll keep. I'm sure every other club is going to keep a close eye on that timeline, and there's already every other club's Twitter has been ablaze with comments after this leaked. But we'll keep an eye on that one. But now let's get to the big game.
Maybe if City, are finally proven guilty, we might get a Premier League or something of that sort. So maybe Omar Berada, being an ex-City man, knows where he's coming from with this.
Speaking of ex City men, somebody who made a comment this week to the tune of, I know all the details of what goes on there. So, Mikel Arteta seems like he has some secrets about Man City as well. Let's get right into that big game. I'll come to you first, Ashwin. What did you think about one, the red card, and two, how Arsenal did after
I
that?
mean, it's like we have been talking about red cards. Like we spoke about the red card situation all through last season, right? And we were talking about how how refereeing standards are so bad in this country. I get why he got the red card, but I also feel that sometimes better sense should prevail both from the refereeing side and from the player side. Like he obviously kicked the ball away. He had made a bad tackle, so and then he was always likely to be given another card. So from that logic, I understand. But come on, like Mike Oliver, like how sort of referee he is. Like he's absolutely pathetic. Like, and it's amazing how referees like that get to officiate in matches of this size and importance. But then I think about it, like there are no good referees in England. So who are you going to give it to? Like who's the other guy, Anthony Taylor or whatever his name is? Like he's even worse. So that obviously changed the game. But I think Arsenal did so well, right? Like um to be leading 2-1 despite for so long, despite playing with 10 man against the best team in Europe probably is something really commendable, I feel. I would have loved if City lost that game despite the red card, but of course, like City know the winning formula. They just find a way to grind those results out. They did not win, but I'm sure it felt like a win to them.
So there's a lot to unpack in that game, and there's been so much narrative from Arsenal fans, especially that the system is rigged and that the referees are all in City's pocket. But Abba, I'm going to come to you on a really interesting, weird moment from the game. Arsenal's second goal, an absolute stunner from Calafiore, but the referee called Kyle Walker over for a chat, and then they played an early free kick. Did City have reason to feel aggrieved there? Were Was the referee in on Arsenal's side in that moment of the game? And talk us through that goal as well.
Yeah. I think we were discussing on the WhatsApp group that that goal probably shouldn't have stood because of the fact that a referee had called Kyle Walker over, and it was from that side of the pitch that the goal was scored. So yeah, I don't think that goal should have stood. Now, I guess both teams could argue that the referee is, the 12th man for the other team, but I think the fundamental issue with the refereeing was more of probably incompetence or buckling in a big game under the pressure. Although Michael Oliver has probably done dozens of big games before, and fans will pull up videos of his mistakes from the previous games as well. Calafiori, that goal, that was an incredible goal. I mean, it's the kind of goal you need to score against City, you should have the ability to score that kind of a goal against City, because they don't very often give you chances to score other more conventional type of play through the defense and score kind of goals. It's an incredible goal. Normally, when you shoot from the inside of the foot with your left foot from that part of the pitch, just to get it on target is a huge, and then to target that far post and get it right inside the post it's just an incredible piece of skill. Talk about a fantastic debut. Now, I'm, of course, aside from the fact that I don't support Arsenal and I don't like them to win, I also just happened to drop Calafiori from my team on fantasy football, so that one hurt a little extra. Just on the whole refereeing bit, I think the issue with this delaying the play, or if you delay the play you'll get a yellow card sort of a situation, is very similar to the handball situation of last year, where the referees have just painted themselves into a corner. Said this is the letter of the law. If you go a millimeter above this line that we have drawn in the sand, you will get a yellow card no matter what. And now, because of that, every referee for 380 games will be looked at if they're enforcing that to the letter, right? Because Arsenal have two red cards now as a result of that, right? So it's very similar to how the handball situation happened last year, where, okay, if this is considered a handball or this is not considered a handball, then that's how it is going to be, and we are going to watch you with eagle eyes for the remaining 300 and something games to ensure that this is how you enforce it. So I think, although the handball rule has become better this year, I think the referees have just completely, or the organization that decides the rules, or the FA or the Premier League, have painted or pushed referees into a corner where every decision now becomes controversial one way or the other. It's just a silly way of doing things.
It's definitely silly, and it definitely hurts when there are certain referees who seem to want to be the story. They can use these situations very easily. I think there's been a lot of videos posted about Jeremy Doku doing something similar in the same game and nothing happening. So it's a slippery slope, that one. I think it just spoiled a really great game. I thought it was going to be one of those classics. Honestly, Man City, Arsenal hasn't been one of those classic fixtures for a long time, and I also think the rivalry wasn't really anything special. But I'm getting the vibes now that this is a real rivalry that's brewing. You can see that there's some hatred there. You can see all the comments that Bernardo Silva is talking all sorts of bullshit after the game. In the game, Haaland, when the cool, calm, ice cold killer Haaland was clearly emotional and rattled, and he was like, he had something, he had like an edge on his in his game as well. So there's definitely something brewing there, and I'm a big fan of that. I hated the Klopp Pep huggy, let's be friends kind of rivalries. Even though the games were fun and the football was great, I hated that kind of camaraderie rivalry. But Arsenal or City, I think City probably more because of the way the game went, may have felt that they won that battle, equalizing in the last minute. But let's talk about the war, Ashwin. Rodri is out for this season. Now, this is a catastrophic event, the kind that we've not seen before, or we have seen it before. Kevin De Bruyne has missed seasons for Man City, and they've been just fine. Is that the same? Are City going to manage? What can we look forward to now?
I think they can manage because they have certain players to back up Rodri, right? So they have Kovacic there already, who can take them through. And I think with Pep and with Pep and City, it's always been about the system more than the personnel. They've had Kevin De Bruyne missing, as you said. Foden stepped up. They've had Foden miss, and like that, someone else would have stepped up. So they can still go through. But you touched upon the point which I'm like extremely passionate about and extremely frustrated about is the ACL injury. And this is a guy who just 1 week back had said that all the players will go on strike if you fucking you know keep doing this, and it happened. Like there was a podcast on Athletic dedicated to that, and it spoke about how the likes of Saka and Bellingham and like all these players would have played like 500 550 games by the age of 27, and that is something that professional players, like the legends of the game, would have played by the age of 30. So there are players who are actually, they won't admit it, but there are players who are actually conserving their energy and not playing to their fullest extent. And I think we keep talking about Rashford, right? Like Rashford burst into the scene and he was known for his pace and attack and all of that. Maybe Rashford is doing that as well. He's conserving his energy because he feels that he'll get injured and then he'll miss like 6 months or whatever. I'm in no way saying that Rashford and Rodri are like in this similar level. Rodri is obviously a much better player, but think about it. Like this was something that was waiting to happen. Like now the man is going to miss a year because he played some 60 or 70 games for Spain, Man City combined. And then what next? Like Saka would can get injured, you don't know. Someone else from City can get injured, you don't know. And you see the difference in how Haaland plays when he's not playing for Norway, when he has that break and he comes in and he's scoring goals for fun. How Salah plays when he did not have he had a proper break in the summer, right? So the Prem, FIFA, UEFA are all responsible for all of this. But going back to your initial point, I'm sorry I got into a mini rant about that. But going about your initial point, I think City are still well covered. I think Champions League is where they might miss Rodri more than the Premier League, is what I feel. Um, uh, Kovacic, like I said, can cover. Rico Lewis can actually cover there as well. I think he played there in preseason as well. So I think Prem they should be fine.
Just on that last point on City, Rodri, since we're on that topic, yes, they went through whole seasons without De Bruyne, and then that year I remember Gundogan really stepped up and was probably, arguably, their best player in that season where De Bruyne missed around 30 games. But if you would ask me before the Rodri injury, who is the one player that City cannot afford to lose? I think that would be Rodri. Yes, they have Kovacic. Yes, Gundogan is back. Yes, Rico Lewis can play, as Ashwin was saying. But there are things that Rodri brings to that team. The way he's a heartbeat and the engine of that team, and the way a lot of their play is dictated by the way his intelligence both on and off the ball. So I think it'll be very hard to replace. Kovacic over 30, 35 games is not even near the same player. So I think, and I know Gundogan is back, but he may or may not be the same Gundogan who left City, right? So it's going to be a big miss, and I wouldn't be surprised if City go into the market in January, especially if at around Christmas time they find themselves 5 or 10 points behind Arsenal. I think it could be it's a massive miss, and it's worth going into the market and getting a player on loan for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. I am on that side of things right now. I think this is one bridge too far for Man City. I don't think they can replace him from within that squad for just the impact that he has. Of course, they have talented players and they might manage and they might just be just fine. I think this would be the final nail in the coffin after losing so many important players and not really replacing them. I think losing Rodri for the entire season is going to be a blow that they can't get over. For me, this is the biggest chance that Arsenal will ever have to win the league with the City without Rodri. Definitely a big, huge blow. Ashwin, you talked about the fixtures, and that is something I promise we're going to get into, listeners, in more detail next episode, because we're going to talk next after the next round of Champions League fixtures, and we're going to talk about the Champions League format next episode. Some of you have reached out asking if we can cover that, so we will next episode. We'll be meeting after the next round of Champions League fixtures, and we'll talk about the format and how whether it's good for us fans, bad in the long run. We'll cover all of those aspects as well. Um, we have a few interesting games coming up. Let's see, what do we have? Who's United playing this week? United, Ashwin.
It's Spurs who are coming into town. Not the worst team to be playing, but obviously Spurs at the moment can uh, can attack pretty well. So we'll see. Last time I remember I was at the game at Old Trafford, and it was a 2-all draw, and we did not play well at all. So I hope it's not a repeat of that. We need to win this game. We just have to win this game.
That is the big game of the weekend. There are a few other tricky ones. Chelsea's playing Brighton. That's never easy, especially for United. If you're United, Chelsea have a tricky fixture there. I think there's another one which is a little bit tricky. We have Newcastle, Man City. Some call it the Oil Derby. Not me, but some do. So let's see how that one goes. I think City should be just fine, but let's see what happens. There are three big games and interesting games this weekend, and a whole round of Champions League as well. We'll come right back to you after these rounds of fixtures, and until then, listeners, have a good week. We'll see you next time.